Hello, and welcome to the second lecture of this last little bit on the ethics section. And for this lecture, we're going to be discussing a sort of famous paper by a philosopher named Peter Singer. Peter Singer is classically understood. I mean, he's a utilitarian of sorts, and he uses his utilitarianism in an applied way. That is, he applies his utilitarianism to his own life and to other ethical quandaries. And back in the 70s, he wrote this paper, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, that got him a little bit of notoriety. And you'll see why. Right, so this is a picture of Peter Singer. Hopefully, at this point, if you've had a chance, you've watched the little video that I posted along with the article. He's best known for both writing this paper and for writing a book called Animal Liberation, in which he defends the liberties of animals and kind of, like, I'd say he's almost certainly a vegetarian or vegan. He also currently works on something that basically a view called effective altruism, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So how does this all get started? Basically, disasters and poverty. So Singer starts by talking or thinking about disasters, basically. Really horrible and atrocious things that have happened or are happening in the world, and many of which cause intense amounts of suffering for regular people like you and me that happen to live in these places. So his specific thing that he's talking about was back in the 70s, there was a famine in India, but we might think of issues similarly today, like natural disasters. Like this is the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico from a few years back. The tsunami that hit Indonesia. I think there was a movie that was made about it, and really, there was some unbelievable number of people that died, and then some really difficult, miserable situations in attempting to accommodate for the health of everyone as things kind of got back on their feet. And just general, issues with respect to poverty in other places where people don't have clean drinking water or enough to eat all the time, or they have to kind of go really far distances in order to get what they need. Singer kind of takes all these things into account and wants to construct a sort of utilitarian argument that obligates us, sort of everyday folk, to try and help out these people, the people that are in need, the people that are suffering from disasters, and the people that just their lives are less well off than ours in general. And the way he's going to do this is by giving what he thinks of as an extremely plausible moral principle that you probably buy into. The idea is that he offers this moral principle, and if you buy into it, what he's going to try and do is show you that given that you accept this moral principle, there's a bunch of stuff that you morally ought to be doing right now that you're probably not doing. And he's then going to sort of take counterexamples to the principle and try and shoot them down. So here's where he starts. Suffering and death from lack of food and shelter and medical care are bad things. They are, we can just assume that suffering, feeling pain, being hungry, being sick, these things are bad, generally speaking. Whether or not you're a utilitarian, you can accept that these things are bad. Now, here is the prevention principle. This is sort of the core to the hinge to Singer's whole argument. And think about it carefully. If it is within your power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing something of comparable moral importance, then you ought morally to do it. Now, remember, so that says if it's within your power to prevent something bad from happening, and, in so doing, you're not sacrificing something that's comparably important, then you ought to do it. All right, so that's Singer's prevention principle. Now let's think about the prevention principle in action. Singer gives this classic case. It's the case of the drowning child, and the drowning child case is meant to be an analogy sort of to another case, but it's supposed to illustrate the principle in action, right? So here's the principle again. Now here's the case. You are walking to work, and you're walking through a park on your way to work, and there happens to be a pond to the side of where you're walking. And as you're walking, you see out in the middle of the pond, a child is drowning, right? And you know that the pond is probably like 4 feet deep or something like that, and that the child is too small clearly to stand, and so the child can't get there. But you know that you're totally safe if you jump in the pond and you go and save the child. However, you also know that if you jump in the pond, you'll probably ruin your pair of shoes or pants, maybe your shirt. But who cares, right? Like, who cares if you ruin your pants or your shirt? You got to save the child. The child's life obviously seems morally more important than the value of your pants or your shoes. So in this situation, seeing the child drowning, it's within your power to prevent something bad from happening, and then you're not going to be sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance. So you ought to save the child, right? If you kept walking, you would be doing something morally speaking wrong. I think hopefully most people share that view, right? People that ignore drowning children do it. I mean, especially if they're doing it because they don't want to get their shoes wet or ruin their shoes, are morally monstrous people. Here's a version of the trolley problem that is to illustrate, right? If you pull the lever, the trolley will cover you with water and mud. Should you pull the lever, right? If you don't pull the lever, the trolley will kill someone. But if you do pull the lever, you'll be covered in mud. Prevention principle in action, right? So here we go. Recognize that the prevention principle itself is unrestricted. If it's within your power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing something of comparable moral importance, you morally ought to do it. It's unrestricted in the sense that anything that's within your power, right? It's unrestricted with respect to distance, with respect to time, with respect to who we're talking about. There's no general restriction to this principle. And so what Singer basically is interested in and kind of worried about, right? So is taking this case and then applying it to people that are, in bad situations in other countries. So take, someone, I mean, and basically what he wants is, he thinks, okay, look, like for the price of a pair of shoes, for the price of a pair of pants, for the price of a t-shirt, for all of the effort that it takes to, type in your credit card number, and do the work, to make the money that you've made, you could donate money to wonderfully efficient aid organizations like Oxfam or UNICEF that will provide clean drinking water and mosquito nets and probably food and basic medical supplies to people in foreign countries that do not have them. And because that's within your power, and insofar as it's within your power to do that, it will save a life. So remember, prevention principle: if it's within your power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing something of comparable moral importance, then you morally ought to do it. Well, it is in your power to give money that thereby saves people. If you look, you can actually determine how much money it takes in order to provide someone with clean drinking water or provide someone with medical attention, with medical care. Um, and so you morally ought to do it because it's, giving up some of your money is not comparably morally important. It's nowhere near as morally important as someone's life and someone's general well-being. But you might think, oh, well, what about, these people are so far away. It can't be the case that, we owe uh, money or allegiance, or that we need to help people that are in poor countries in I don't know, the Eastern Bloc of Europe and Russia, or in Africa or South America. And Singer wants to say, well, look, distance doesn't matter. Remember, the principle is unrestricted. Distance just isn't going to change the morality of the situation here, right? Whether you're talking about someone that's your neighbor, whether or not you're talking about the child that's in the pond right in front of you, or whether or not you're talking about someone 2 states over, if you have the power to help them, and you're not going to sacrifice something of morally comparable value in order to do so, then it seems like you morally ought to do so, right? Here's another version of the trolley problem that's involves distance. We've just added some distance, right? The trolley, if it keeps going, will go through this portal, which will teleport it 10,000 miles, and then someone will die. Or you could pull the lever, and again, you'll be covered in mud. You'll have to get some new shoes. What should you do? Obviously, in this case, you should pull the lever, sacrifice your, not very morally important clothing in order to save a life. Now, you might also think, wait a minute, well, yeah, but nobody else is doing it, right? Like, I don't see my friends giving a bunch of their disposable income to help people that are hungry or don't have medical care, basic medical care in foreign countries. If no one else is doing it, then why do I have to? And you can respond to this, and Singer does in this way. Imagine a group of people is standing next to the pond as you begin to walk by, watching the child drown in the pond, and you realize that this is going on. You see that no one is helping, and you think to yourself, no one's helping the child that's drowning. I guess I don't morally have to do so either. Well, don't you think that would be, morally speaking, awful thing to think? I mean, just because a bunch of people aren't doing the right thing doesn't mean that you shouldn't do the right thing. Doesn't mean that you're not morally obliged to do the right thing. It just looks like this group of people, they're all doing the morally wrong thing. Just because a big group of people are all doing the wrong thing doesn't somehow make it less problematic or less wrong to do as they're doing. So you still ought to save the drowning child. Again, the analogy here is for Singer is that just because you don't see your friends donating a bunch of money, or any money to UNICEF or Oxfam to help people get basic medical care and clean water, doesn't mean that it's not the case that they ought to, and doesn't mean that it's somehow not the case that you ought not to, right? You still, if it's the case that they should be donating, and you should be donating, it doesn't matter that they're not donating. That's just how kind of morality works in this case. Sometimes it's a big group of people are doing the wrong thing. They're doing the thing that's morally wrong, and in this case, especially, I think Singer wants to say something like that. Lots of people aren't doing the right thing from his perspective, especially according to something like utilitarianism. So here's another version of this example, right? The trolley problem, if you haven't noticed at this point, is my favorite philosophy ethics meme, because it's really easy to use for everything. Um, so imagine you are one of a million people that could pull the lever, right? If you go up to the pull lever and you actually pull it, then you'll be the one that's covered in mud, right? But you know, nobody's going up to pull the lever. So does it, somebody's going to die if you don't go up and pull the lever? Does it somehow make it the case that, you're off the hook because there's a million people there that aren't pulling the lever? No. Kitty Genovese, I think we talked a little bit about this when we were discussing the Thompson article. It's sort of maybe something similar here. Remember, Kitty Genovese is this case where this woman gets murdered behind her own apartment building, and something like 30 people hear and even some see the attack occurring. And no one goes to help her, and even worse, no one even phones the police to come and help her in the situation that's going on. And there's something here that's called the bystander effect that may be in play, which is that when you see that a lot of people are doing something, not doing something, if you see a lot of people sort of not acting, then it seems to take away the urgency of acting, or it seems to sort of lessen the feeling of obligation to act in certain ways, right? So in this case, it might be that something like the bystander effect was in play. Similarly, if you were to see 30 people standing on the shore watching a child drown, that you wouldn't feel obligated to go save the child because not everyone is doing so. I mean, hopefully you would, but the idea is supposed to be that it applies to this case as well. You don't see all of your friends and family members donating money to Oxfam and UNICEF, so you don't feel obligated to do so, right? But here, the thought is the bystander effect is a cognitive bias that we should actually be on the lookout for and try to avoid. Just because you and a bunch of other people are not acting, to do the right thing, doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't be acting in the way that you ought to be acting. All right, so let's add this up and think about it, right? So there's 325 million people in the United States. And suppose, just spitballing here, that it would take $187 billion to lift everyone in the world out of poverty. I think that that's actually possibly a fair estimate. At least it was a fair estimate a little while ago when I did some of the research on this. Now take 187 billion and divide that by the 325 million people in the United States, and you come up with $575 roughly. Now, if you take $575 and you divide that by the number of days in the year, you end up with about $1.50 a day. Now, imagine if every American, I mean, clearly there are some Americans that are in poverty, so it can't be all of them, but it's not the case that all Americans are in poverty. And I think that probably most Americans can afford $1.50 per day, right? Now imagine, I mean, the Starbucks coffee here is somewhere between $2 and $6. People that are addicted to Starbucks tend to spend at least that much every single day. I mean, a cup of coffee these days costs often more than $1.50. If we were able to donate $1.50 per day, we could do an extreme amount of good to lift people out of poverty. That doesn't seem very morally important at all. $1.50 a day. So suppose that there's some natural disaster, and if everyone gave $20, the needs of everyone affected would be covered. Now, the moral worth of $20 versus making sure someone has adequate food, shelter, or healthcare is clearly, lower. $20 is not as morally valuable. But you might think, well, yeah, okay, but everyone's not going to give $20, right? It's unlikely. People will certainly shirk their obligations to help. So what are we supposed to do if not everyone's going to, if it's the case that if everyone gave $20, that would solve the problem, but not everyone's going to give $20. Well, for the rest of us that are giving, it's not like we need to accommodate the needs of everyone affected. So what should we do, right? A disaster happens. We realize that giving $20, if everyone gives $20, then it'll solve the problem. We realize that not everyone's gonna give $20. So, what should we do? Should we just say, oh, tough luck to all those people that are out there that, because not everyone's gonna give? No, it seems arbitrary to do that, because it's, who's gonna get your $20 and who's not gonna get anyone's $20 because some other people aren't gonna help. So Singer thinks, oh, okay, so the solution here is actually to give more. If 1 out of 20 people don't give, then we just need everyone to give $1 more, right? And so on and so forth. If 2 out of 20 people don't give, then we need everyone to give $2 more, and so on and so forth until we get everything covered. But suppose, more than 1 out of 20 don't give, right? And just suppose things how things actually are, which is half of American households, only half give charitably, the other half don't. And because only half give charitably, it's probably the case that of that half, they don't give adequately to charity, or they don't give as much as they actually could. So if it's actually the case that it's more like 11 out of 20 people in this sort of fake scenario that aren't giving, and so that means that 11 will have to make up for the rest by giving an extra $16 apiece. Raising this to our first figure, we end up with about a $1,000 price tag per person. Now, question: is the moral value of $1,000 greater somehow than someone's life? Of course not. $1,000 doesn't even seem to be that much, really, in the end. I mean, it seems a lot to a college student, maybe. It's a lot. I mean, it's like probably the cost of your laptop or something like that. But is it really that much? As things go up in this way, right, with respect to the money, the amount that is needed to actually cover the costs of things, fewer people are likely to give enough or even at all. And so for those of us that are going to give, we have an obligation, Singer basically thinks, to give more. In fact, to give as much as we possibly can give without going into poverty ourselves. Now, is giving to charity supererogatory, or is it something like a duty up to a certain point? Remember, supererogatory actions are the actions that we are not required to take by morality. Morality doesn't require them, but they're still morally valuable. They're still morally good actions to take. They're the things that go above and beyond one's moral obligations. So question, is giving to charity supererogatory, above and beyond one's moral obligations, or is it part of one's moral obligations? Is it a duty that one give up to a certain point? Well, here's an example, right? If you pull the lever, the trolley will ruin your new clothes, but it follows that you said earlier that you ought to give money away rather than spend it on clothes, which is, we do not need to keep us warm. To do this is not charitable or generous. On the contrary, we ought to give the money away, and it is wrong not to do so. Here, again, these are things from Singer's paper. The whole way we look at moral issues, our moral conceptual scheme needs to be altered, and with it, the way of life that has come to be taken for granted in our society. On average, Americans only give about 4% of their income to charity, and a better society might live by this motto: no man should have more than enough, while others have less than they need. This is kind of Singer's idea here, is that really we ought to be trying to give uh, more to charity, or at the very least doing a lot more to try and lift people in poverty that still have serious needs out of poverty, while there are people that have so much more than enough to have, right? In this current day and age, while we have people that are absurdly rich, billionaires that have money that is, by itself could actually cover um, the, like bring everyone out of poverty. It just seems absurd to live in the society that we currently do. Now, um, Singer, the main criticisms, I think, of Singer's view here are that his view is too extreme, and I do take that seriously as a criticism. It seems extreme to think that one morally ought to give away pretty much all of one's disposable income in order to help people that are in need. But reluctance to face this criticism shouldn't be taken as a criticism of the view. Instead, it should you should see it, I think, as a goad to attempt to change, or at least reflect on your own moral codes and your own behavior. Basically, I think if anything in this case, if anything is to come from Singer's argument and point of view, it's that we ought to begin to shift our expectations of one another with respect to seeing what one another ought to do, and how one another ought to act, and what one another ought to sacrifice for what is morally important. There's two practical points here. One might think, like, hey, isn't this all the government's job? And shouldn't the government actually be, helping people out and just collecting it in taxes? Singer says, no, look, the more that we give to charity, the more the governments will notice that we're giving to charity, and so the more likely they are to take more action. So another point that you might think is that I don't know who to trust in giving my money to charity, right? I want to make sure my money goes to help, and where and how should I give? Well, there are wonderful charitable organizations that actually, they try to find out what the most effective charities are, right? So here's a great website called givewell.com, which is part of the effective altruist movement, where they actually go and check on all of the charitable organizations and can tell you just how effective the organization is. That is, if you give them money, how much of the money actually goes to helping people versus how much goes to the bureaucratic system, or pays for people's salaries or something like that, here in the United States, or where the charity is just much less effective. So if you've been moved, it would be interesting to know. I'll probably build this into the quiz. How many of you are actually willing to accept Singer's argument? And how many of you are actually willing to, attempt to change your lifestyle at all by giving more to charity and helping others in a way that's, sacrificial to yourself, but not, you're not sacrificing something of equal moral importance. If you're interested in this, which hopefully you are, and I mean, I think this is kind of wrapping up the ethics with this, because I think it's a really interesting argument, and hopefully it really does cause you to reflect on yourself and your own actions. And the effective altruist movement is a really interesting movement to sort of learn about and get involved in if you can. I think these days the effective altruists are literally trying to push a utilitarian style argument where the idea is like, what they want people to do is, college students to go and learn as much as they can in college and become like businessmen or lawyers or get high powered, high paying jobs to then go and take as much of the money that they're making as they possibly can and donate it in order to, or actually even start funds that can then, uh, the endowments of universities or things like that, that can then continue to fund, fund issues like poverty, like bringing people out of poverty, like bringing people clean water, like bringing people basic medical supplies and the like. Um, the other option here, and I think I'm guilty of this as well, is simply to accept that you are an awful person, that you are immoral, that you are selfish, and that you are living in a morally bankrupt society, and that you aren't going to do anything to stop being that way or to help the society move beyond that. And that might be if you're a realist, that might seem harsh, but I think that that's plausibly how things actually are. Um, and I think I myself am subject to this, and I don't give as much as I ought to, as much as I think probably morally should, even if in the end it's a supererogatory action to give charitably. That is, I'm not morally required. I'm not as sympathetic to utilitarianism. I'm more sympathetic to a deontological approach that says that you ought to help people when you can, but in this case, I mean, it seems like I can, right? So this is hopefully, if it's not a wake up call to, try and give more, hopefully it's at least a goad. If you're completely, unmoved by this, then I mean, we're not like, what the hell are you doing in here? What the hell are you doing in this section? Why are you thinking about this stuff? Maybe you're here for the rest of the philosophy, but this is so far up to this point we've been talking about ethics and what it is to do things that are right and wrong. We've been studying these things. This is the bread and butter of what it is to do philosophy, is to worry about the rightness and wrongness of certain kinds of actions. And maybe you should not be studying ethics if you aren't moved by this at all. All right. My next lecture for this week will be an introduction to skepticism and epistemology. And don't forget, your first papers are due this coming Friday, and that is all posted up on the Canvas page. So be sure to look at that. I think I'm going to, because the papers are due, I'm going to be giving not giving any quiz this week. So enjoy the not having to study for the quiz, and I hope that you have a good time doing the writing assignment. I hope it's not too difficult for anyone. All right.